there is still no evidence whatsoever of Russian collusion between the Russian state and the Trump campaign involving WikiLeaks.
Have you had any contact with Robert Mueller or his prosecutors?
We have not.
None at all.
That's correct.
Does that suggest to you that you actually are a target? Usually they speak with the witnesses first.
Well, it suggests nothing at all. Again, where is the crime? I've always made it clear that so-called dirty tricks come up to but do not cross the line into illegality.
New reaction there today from Roger Stone, who's denying claims that he may have spoken about WikiLeaks to President Trump during the campaign. This comes as the Washington Post reports the president made late-night calls to Stone from a blocked number. Joining me now is former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade, an MSNBC contributor, and MSNBC legal analyst Katie Phang. Ladies, with a good day to you. Barbara, I'm going to get to the Washington Post report in just a moment, but your reaction first to Stone's comments this morning.
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, one is he says, dirty tricks do not cross the legal line. Well, I think it depends very much on what those dirty tricks are. One of the interesting things about the indictment that Robert Mueller has already filed against the hacking defendants is that he framed it not as just the hacking crime, but as a crime to defraud the United States by interfering with our elections. And so that could include not just the hacking, but the dissemination of the emails. And if others, including Americans like Roger Stone or President Trump or anyone else, provided advice to WikiLeaks about the content of what should be released or the timing of the release, they could be added as co-conspirators. The other thing that's always interesting to a prosecutor is shifting stories. Now he's saying, I did talk to President Trump about WikiLeaks. And so when people change their story, he's amended his testimony to Congress. When people change their story, it raises a red flag of what's known as consciousness of guilt. People don't lie when the truth isn't something to be feared. They only lie when they're concerned that the truth is something that's damaging. And so that catches my eye as well.
Yeah. So the fact that Stone, Katie, is arguing that his actions were legal, how do you see it?
Well, he's trying to basically hide in plain sight. He admits that he hired Jerome Corsi to do political oppositional research. He admits that he was dealing in dirty politics, but like Barbara just said, exactly how dirty is dirty and does it become illegal if what we know is the following. Roger Stone can never explain, and by the way, I was telling your producer, Alex, I spoke to Roger Stone on Thursday, and I asked him, how do you tweet out in August 2016 about the release of John Podesta being his time in the barrel, and then 6 weeks later, WikiLeaks releases the emails? He says, that's categorically false. Well, as we know as prosecutors, you can say something's false, but when we know it's true because the evidence belies what you're saying, then we know that you've committed a crime. And so Roger Stone is definitely talking about time in the barrel. Roger Stone is looking at his time in the barrel, and he's going to be indicted for collusion, which we know isn't a crime, but conspiracy to commit some offense involving the Trump campaign with Russia as a hostile state, or he's going to be indicted for lying to Congress. We know that he's now to amend his testimony 3 separate times before Congress, and so there's got to be a lie somewhere there.
So look, Barbara, to Katie's point that Stone admits, but now is defending the actions to contact Corsi about Assange and WikiLeaks. Let's take a listen to what he said here.
And like every Politico in America, like every political reporter, I was interested in knowing what exactly they had. But there was no response to that. I mean, if I send you an email saying, George, you should rob a bank, but you don't rob a bank, neither will I start guilty of you on that.
So I'm curious, is that something that would hold up in court? Because are you guilty of a crime if you are working towards completing it?
Yes, what he said there is actually not accurate. There's a crime called solicitation. If you ask someone to commit a crime on your behalf, you are guilty even if that person does not follow through and commit the crime if you intended it for it to happen. So that alone is not true. It's also possible to engage in conspiracy by agreeing to commit a crime even if that crime doesn't come to fruition. And so, in fact, here it did come to fruition. And so I think on either level, Roger Stone is wrong. And I think I share the thoughts that he is perhaps facing his own time in the barrel.
So, Katie, this former Trump associate telling the Washington Post, quote, unless Mueller has tape recordings of the phone calls, what would that prove? If Mueller wants to prove these discussions took place, how can he do it?
Well, Mueller has no shortage of evidence that we haven't been privy to. They can be in the form of emails, recordings, text messages, etc. And that's the key to the Mueller investigation. The noose tightens ever so slowly, or maybe even more quickly, as we're now seeing with the Jerome Corsi, the Paul Manafort, the Roger Stone. And so what we don't know is what Mueller actually has in his bag of evidence. We don't know exactly what he's obtained because he's been having hours, 7 voluntary interviews with Michael Cohen, hours of testimony that he's been doing. And so we don't really know what he has, but we can assume that he has the actual evidence to be able to prove his case.
But Barbara, these late night phone calls that have been reporting by the Washington Post, if it's accurate, how likely is it that Stone and the president discussed WikiLeaks during these off-hour chats?
Well, it's hard to know. One of the things a prosecutor will often do is put together a timeline of events to look at how things match up. Because as time goes on, you learn additional facts that you can layer onto those timelines. Things that you didn't know was significant at one point become significant later. So I imagine what they would want to do is look at the timing of the calls and how they relate to other activities. It's hard to know exactly what was said, if it was only Roger Stone and President Trump involved in the calls themselves. But sometimes you can make some circumstantial inferences based on timing about things that happen. And so, you know, the calls alone are not going to be dispositive of anything, but I think you can draw some fair inferences, which could be important down the road when you look at the big picture.
All right, my thanks to two of our best legal analysts, Barbara McQuade, Katie Phang. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Coming up next, as we remember the 41st President of the United States, one of his adorers.